All right, Biology 11. Our next topic in our evolution unit is natural selection. Again, following the same format as other videos, we've got our course notes up here in the corner on the iPad, and then on the whiteboard we'll write down diagrams and further explanations and things like that. So in our last talk, we talked about a lot of the earlier theories, some that still hold water today, some maybe not as much, but we talked about some early ideas about life and evolution, change within species over time. And right at the end of it, we were just on the doorstep of Charles Darwin putting all these pieces together and coming up with his theory of evolution by natural selection. So before we even get into that, let's talk about that. Evolution is basically change in a species over time. All right? Now we know already that the environment just kind of puts out all these conditions and you have to survive in it. And if your traits, your DNA and the traits that they give you, if they're a good match to that environment, you'll survive. And if they're not, you'll probably die. So that's what evolution is. Evolution is change within a species over time. Natural selection is the mechanism that drives evolution. It's the mechanism that explains why things evolve. All right? So same but not quite the same. And of course, natural selection, if you're showing enough ingenuity, you can beat it. I don't know if you can see that. If you have it on your iPad or your own computer at home, you'll see there's a hamster there and someone has taped a knife to it. So now you have the ultimate hamster, way better than just the average hamster. Anyway, Mother Nature, pick me, pick me. If you look at even the title, natural, meaning related to nature, and selection, meaning to pick or select something, right? So this is a good title here as well. Mother Nature, pick me, pick me. All right, so let's go through this. All right. So what we're going to be talking about in this presentation is 4 observations. Darwin was a naturalist from England, and he made 4 observations about everyday things in nature. These are happening in the natural world. And he put these 4 observations together. He noticed, oh, there's something you see over and over again. Oh, there's another pattern I see over and over and over again. So he made these 4 observations of things occurring in the natural world. From the 4 observations, he made 3 inferences. When you infer something, you notice a pattern or you make several observations that are related, and then you suggest how that works or how it would explain something. So his inferences explain evolution through natural selection. All right? So these explain how the whole process runs down. All right? So first we'll go through the 4 observations, then we'll go through the 3 inferences that he made based on these 4 observations. All right? And the crazy part about it was his observations are things where if I told you, hey, did you know this was happening in nature? You'd go like, yeah, sir, like, duh, right? They were common everyday things. He was just the first one to put them together, right? And again, this is in the mid-1800s. It's also a time when the church has a strong grip on society, and many, many people still hold fast that God created all creatures. They're immutable. They were created perfect. We were walking on the earth the same time as other animals that are now, extinct. And so, and the earth, of course, being only 6,000 years old. And so you've got to bring that into it too, the social thing, the social impact of the church on this. So these observations might have been noticed by other people, but they may not have put them forth. Darwin himself often felt very scared or afraid for his own life and well-being because of the impact his theory would have in terms of, as society would feel demasking God, right? So let's go through these 4 simple observations and we'll put them together here. Now the first 2 deal with genetic variation. We open the course with genetics. So we know a bit about this. This shouldn't be a surprise to us. All right. The first thing, the traits for a population show variation. All right. And you're thinking, really, sir, that's something he noticed that people never noticed before? People did notice things like that before, right? If you look at things like height, there's a tremendous amount of variation in height. You have very, very tall people, very, very short people, all, different heights of people in between. Hair color, right? Different hair colors out there, skin color, eye color, blood types. So for any given trait, there's variation within a population, right? So I'll add in a population. Now a population is simply all the members of the same species in a given area. All right? We know what a species is from an earlier talk, right? Physically and physiologically similar, freely interbreed. We don't force them, we don't lock them in a room. They freely interbreed, they can find each other in nature. And then they produce offspring that are viable. Their kids can have kids someday, right? If you remember from an earlier lecture, the donkey and the mule look similar. They will freely interbreed, but their offspring is the mule, so it doesn't count, right? They're not the same species. A population is all the same species, all the members of that same group that is the same species. So we look here, there's dogs, right? There's several different types of dogs here, different sizes, different body types, different fur colors, right? So, but they're all the same species. So this isn't mind-blowing. This is pretty straightforward, pretty easy, right? It's one of those, duh, like, really? Type of points, right? The next one, most of this variation is inherited from your parents. So variation is passed down from your parents. We talked in class about, have you ever seen pictures of your own parents or your grandparents when they were your age, right? And several people put their hands up and they said, it's remarkable how much they look like their grandma or their grandpa or their mom or dad back in the day, right? And that's basically it. This is what that's saying. You look the way you look because it's a combination of your parents' traits, right? Not a big thing. Look at the dogs here. These two dogs gave rise to these pups, right? You don't have these two dogs putting out like wiener dogs or Dalmatians or Chihuahuas. The puppies look like these two dogs because their DNA came from the DNA of both of these parents. Half from mom, half from dad through meiosis. And variation, because we know in meiosis there's crossing over and things like that. So nothing mind-blowing yet. Of course, there's another example. These two dogs, and there's the offspring. So it's, so far you're going, sir, that's pretty plain stuff. And that's it, right? Those are the first two. Now the second two talk about population stability. Now, population stability means if the population is stable, it means it kind of stays at the same number. It's not increasing too much, it's not decreasing too much. Yeah, people die and some people are born, or some insects die and some insects are born, but the population stays at roughly the same number year after year after year. That's what population stability is talking about, right? So, the first thing, way more offspring are produced than what can survive, right? We know offspring are children, right? So way too many offspring are made. So what does this mean? Well, a friend of mine, Christian, his old man had a pond, a koi fish pond in his backyard back in Nova Scotia. And so he loved that pond. He'd go out there, he'd feed the fish. It wasn't a huge pond, but it was a good sized pond. And so we used to ask him, Christian's dad, hey, how many fish do you figure in that pond? He'd say, maybe about a 75, 80 fish. Right? They were good sized fish. Koi fish can grow quite large. I don't know if you've ever seen them before. 75, 80 fish. And so, anyway, I remember one spring where Christian and I were by the pond, and there were tons of fish. Right? It was early in the spring. There were eggs everywhere and tons of little hatchlings, young fish swimming around. And I'm going like, oh my God, there's like 1 million fish in this pond. Right? There's way more than just 75 or 80 fish. But then Christian's dad goes, nope, lots of those are going to die. Right? We're like, what are you talking about? Like, who's going to take them? There were predaceous diving beetles there at the pond. Some of them would die just because they didn't get enough food. Some would die simply because of sickness that they had contracted. And there was a stork that came around, a heron actually, that would come around. It's like a stork. And the heron would steal fish as well. Christian's father hated that heron. Anyway, the pond only had so much room. And so much food was given each day. And so in terms of resources, they were limited. Look, even though there's 1,000 fish right now with all these hatchlings running around, the pond can only sustain 75 to 80 healthy adult-sized fish. Some of you got to go. Some died due to illness. Some died due to insects when they were hatchlings. The heron would take some as well, right? So what happens is, because of limited resources, like limited amounts of food, limited amounts of space and things like that, lots of the hatchlings would die each year. And at the end of the season, come towards the winter time, October and that, the pond would be back down to its 75 or 80 survivors, right? So we see that over and over again. Tons and tons of offspring. Insects are masters of it. We can see some insect eggs here, right? 2 insects, a mom and dad insect, made all these eggs. Just like these fish eggs here, there's tons of them. 2 fish making hundreds and hundreds of eggs. So if that was the case and they all survived, you'd be able to walk across the ocean because it'd just be fish everywhere. Most of the offspring are going to die. And Mother Nature kind of does this, checks and balances things with the number of offspring, right? We talked about in an earlier video that fish were terrible parents. She lays the eggs, he sprays the sperm, they both swim away. Terrible parents. They don't look after it. But look, there's tons of hatchlings that will result. So surely some of them will survive. Lots will die. Same with the insects. The insects will lay the eggs, and quite often they go away after a certain point. So they're both very, very bad parents. If you're not putting the energy into parenting, Mother Nature allows you to have many offspring, knowing many of them are going to die. Then you look at things like bears and lions, ourselves, the larger mammals. We only have a couple of offspring. We have only one as a human. Usually, if someone has a baby, it's one baby. Sometimes 2 or 3, but usually 1. Lions, a couple of cubs. 1, 2, 3 cubs. Bears, the same thing. There's fewer offspring. And what we see when there's a lot fewer offspring is Mother Nature knowing we can't afford to lose 1 or 2 cubs because that's the next generation for that family. Those species that have fewer offspring put a lot more parenting into them. Just an observation. Anyway, so that's number 3. Way too many offspring are made that can actually survive. Number 4. Populations tend to stay stable. Stable means the same number. Like Christian's dad. He said, hey, look, I know there's a ton of little fish in there now. By the end of the season, that pond's only going to be able to hold 75, 80 fish. Lots of them are going to die. The population stayed stable. There'd be a boom, and then quickly within a few weeks, tons of the little fish should be dead. They'd be gone. Lunch for something else, or they'd be found floating there in the pool, in the pond because they had gotten sick or something like that, right? So these are the 4 things, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the 4 observations. None of these are mind-blowing, right? These are everyday things, and when we discuss them, you're probably like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, sure. So now we're going to look at how Darwin put these 4 observations together to form his theory of evolution through natural selection. So his inferences. All right, inference number 1. Now again, an inference is an explanation of how something works based on observations. Hey, I saw this occurring here. This is how why I think that's happening. So inference number 1 is competition. Members of a species must compete for survival due to limited or lack of resources, right? And so each environment has a certain amount of space or habitat for the creatures. Each environment has a certain amount of water. Each environment has a certain amount of food, right? And so what happens is the different animals, we'll say animals, even though plants, fungi, they all have to compete. We'll say animals. The different animals have to go through this checklist. Think of Mother Nature. Every day, the environment, every day, she's standing there with that checklist on a clipboard and saying, hey, you got to do the following. You got to be able to get food. You've got to be able to get water. Do you have a space to live in, a shelter of some sort? Do you have a mate? Can you escape from the things that are trying to escape? The things that are trying to eat you. And there's little boxes by each one. Right? And every day, each animal has to, right? And what every animal wants to do is put check marks in those boxes, right? If I can get all of these things, plus some other things are in there as well, but if I can get all of these things, I'm going to live, I'm going to thrive, things are going to be good. But the thing is, each environment only has certain amounts. And as Darwin noticed, a ton of offspring were just put out. So me and my 1,000 siblings, we all want food. We all want water. We all want a space to live. We all want a mate. And we all want to be able to escape predators. And so the environment doesn't have the resources to outfit 1,000 of us. And that's just from one mating pair. There's 1,000 from that family over there, and 1,000 from that family over there, and 1,000 from that family over there. So there's a lot of offspring all competing. And we're competing against the adults as well. So for these resources, there's competition. We have to compete for these, right? If there's 31 of us in the class and there's only 20 meals, that means 11 go hungry, right? So if the meals are across the street, whoever's the fastest might get it, like our cheetah friends here. Or I might have to fight you for it, right? Or if there's a predator around, our coloration of our feathers, our fur, our scales, or skin maybe allows us to hide from the predator. Some will be a better match to the background and hide better. Others are going to be easily seen and get picked off by the predator. So that variation comes in that Darwin talked about. That variation is going to help us decide who wins the competition. So here we've got one antelope, right? And we've got 4 cheetahs here. And we can see the cheetahs, we've got 2 small, shorter ones, a medium-sized one, and a taller one. There's their food source, right? They're all thinking, yummy, food is at the top of the list. I want to have food today. There's my food. The next thing kind of addresses who wins the competition, right? And basically it says survival of the fittest. So we're going to go back to all that variation that we got from our parents. Remember the first 2 observations. And those traits are what we're going to use to get these. I need, because there's a competition, because some of these are limited, my traits are what I'm going to use. Am I fast? Can I hide well? Am I able to escape this predator? Can I catch food? Right? So these various things. Can I tolerate the plants that are here? Are they poisonous to me? For some species, a plant is totally fine. For others, it's poison. So all of these things, my traits are going to allow me to access these. If my traits are a great fit to the environmental demands, then I get all check marks. Yes, 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 yes. And I thrive and survive, right? If my traits are maladjusted or maladapted to my environment, which means not very well adjusted or adapted to my environment, then I'm not going to be able to win. I'm not going to get these things. I'm not going to win that competition, right? That's why you don't see 500-pound cheetahs, because they'd be too slow. And the stuff that they eat is really fast. So here's our cheetahs here. Again, we got the two shorter ones, the tall one and the medium one, right? And so what happens is they chase this thing down. Now we can see the cheetah with the slightly longer legs, a variation in cheetahs, leg length. It takes longer strides and it catches the food. The other three, they don't eat that day, right? Food is very important. So that cheetah, it gets to eat. The other ones, not so much. Now, the best fit individuals survive, right? That makes sense. If my traits allow me to get all of this stuff over here very easily, then I'm going to survive. What the best fit do then is they survive to adulthood. And they have kids, they have offspring. So the best fit survive and have offspring. The offspring are going to have the traits of who? They're going to have the offspring are going to have the traits of the parents. And if the parents were great in the competition because they had the best fit traits of their environment, they're going to pass on those best fit traits. The other cheetahs that didn't survive, they're not passing on their traits. Just like the fish, the hatchlings that died, they never reached adulthood. So they're not passing on those traits that didn't allow them to survive. The only fish that are going to reach adulthood and mate are the surviving ones. And something in their genetics, in their traits, allowed them to do that, allowed them to survive. And so what happens is the best traits become the norm. It means they become more prevalent, right? You're going to see them everywhere. So here's our two cheetahs. We had the taller one and the shorter one. And if you remember at the beginning, there was only one tall one. Because the tall one keeps winning, the next generation of cheetahs will probably be slightly taller, will have slightly longer legs than the earlier generations, right? And so you can imagine the level of competition between these cheetahs, now that the majority of them are tall, is going to be even tougher. And survival is going to be even harder, right? So again, there's competition for limited traits. Who's going to win the competition? Whoever's the best fit to the environmental demands. How do you determine if you're best fit? If you can find all these things and get check marks. If your traits allow you to do that, you survive. If your traits are doing this, bad news, you're dead. The best fit survive, reach adulthood, pass on their traits. The population becomes better. Those best fit traits become more prevalent. And that's basically how evolution works. These three simple inferences. And I tend to think they're pretty simple. So that's it. That's natural selection. Anyway, of course, Peter Griffin has to end off our slideshow here. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, we'll put it that way. Anyway, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, just write them into the comment section below the YouTube video that you're watching, or go through Edsby if you're one of my students and ask me there, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Hope you enjoyed the lecture. Natural selection explains something very complex, but is actually pretty easy, right? One interesting thing, when his contemporaries, some of the other forward thinkers, read Darwin's work, Buffon, and remember we mentioned Buffon yesterday, he read it and goes, how foolish of me not to have thought of this, right? A lot of these guys are on the edge, but Darwin tied it all together with these inferences. Anyway, I'll see you in the next lecture. Hope you enjoyed this one. I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.